Star Trek Voyager, Starfleet Academy, The Chance Factor, Chapter 1. Horrified, Cadet Kathryn Janeway stared at the biocontrol panel in the ship's science lab. The containment field isolating the poisonous alien microorganism the team was assigned to analyze had just failed. "Do something, Chav!" Mario Centauri looked at the Tellarite in charge of the bioscan. Cadet Chav placed his hand on his panel and froze. "What happened, Tava?" Kathryn yelled at the Andorian cadet as she frantically keyed her board to discharge a lethal burst of high-intensity radiation. There wasn't time to wait for Chav to figure out a defense. "A glitch in the power conduits interrupted the energy flow to the field, and I didn't notice it right away." The Andorian girl's blue skin darkened to a deeper shade when she glanced at Kathryn's panel. "An eradication sweep? Are you crazy? We'll be killed." "We're dead anyway, Tava," Chav snorted through his piggish nose. "I should have thought of a radiation sweep." "At least the rest of the crew has a chance," Mario sighed heavily and continued to monitor the environmental status board. "It could be a lot worse. This corrosive critter is still confined to the lab." "Lab seals disintegrating," the flat computer voice said calmly. "Total failure in 3 seconds. Kathryn didn't hesitate. She initiated the radiation sweep sequence. "Seal integrity compromised." The computer's blunt announcement hit Kathryn with a force more devastating than a phaser blast. She closed her eyes against the blinding glare of the radiation burst that neutralized all life in the lab. 1 second too late. The airborne microorganism was loose in the ship. Everyone on the USS Lancaster would die in less than 30 minutes. The memory of the Lancaster disaster burned in Kathryn's mind. She had failed completely. How could she ever explain that she was responsible for the death of an entire crew to her father, even if it was only a hollow simulation? Simple, she thought dismally. She couldn't. Urging Shawnee into a trot, Kathryn began to post with practiced ease, moving up and down in the saddle to counter the bounce of the horse's brisk gait. She concentrated on the staccato sound of shod hooves on hard-packed ground. Horseback riding was one of many recreational activities Starfleet Academy provided for the cadets. Kathryn hadn't had time to visit the stable since arriving a few weeks before, but 5 minutes in the arena had convinced Lieutenant Commander Ralston that she was competent equestrian. Not only had he given her permission to ride alone, he had asked her to ride Shawnee, a high-strung thoroughbred that was desperately in need of some exercise. Taking to the trails without Bramble was a painful reminder of the little dog's recent death, but a relaxing ride had always helped her sort through her problems back home in Indiana. It wasn't working this morning. Kathryn had hoped the hypnotic rhythm of the horse moving beneath her would numb her troubled mind, but nothing could distract her from the one thing she feared most: failure. But failing so miserably because someone else had made a fatal error was something she couldn't reconcile. It was a mistake that would have killed all 76 people on the survey vessel, including her, if the situation had been real and not a simulated training exercise. With a slight pressure on the reins, Kathryn brought Shawnee back to a walk as the bridle path turned into the woods. The tall trees blocked the sun, dimming the light and creating gray shadows along the trail. The darker atmosphere suited her somber mood. She couldn't escape the sobering realization that one day she might really die because of another person's incompetence. Even worse, Kathryn thought grimly. What if an error in my judgment kills someone? It was a possibility she couldn't accept, but one she had to face. A shrill, panicked scream suddenly shattered the quiet tranquility of the forest and broke through Kathryn's dismal reflections. Her reaction was instant and instinctive. Pushing everything else out of her mind, Kathryn tightened her legs and her grip on the reins. The horse began to prance nervously, but she held him to a steady jog as she continued down the path and tried to pinpoint the direction of the cry and the sound of pounding feet. She saw a flash of green and gray dart through the dense foliage ahead and to her right. On the left, through the thinning trees, another rider in Starfleet red and black was riding furiously up an intersecting trail. The rider giving chase was a couple of 100 yards behind the runaway. Realizing that she was closer, Kathryn pressed Shawnee into a controlled hand gallop and plunged off the path into the trees. By angling through the woods, she could intercept the runaway long before the other rider caught up. Leaning low over Shawnee's neck, Kathryn kept a sharp eye on the terrain in front of her. Running cross-country was dangerous for both her and the horse. A large branch could easily knock her out of the saddle, and if Shawnee stepped into a hole at this speed, he could break a leg. For the most part, the ground was clear, and the trees were spaced far enough apart to maintain a fairly direct course. Turning her face into Shawnee's neck to avoid being slapped by a branch, Kathryn looked up to see a large log ahead. She was already in position and moved her hands forward to prevent popping the horse's mouth as he sprang and extended his head over the barrier. Gathering Shawnee back when he landed, she looked to her left as the runaway rider squealed again. "What on earth?" Kathryn blinked. Through a break in the trees, she saw a human boy wearing cadet gray, clinging desperately to his saddle. But he wasn't riding a horse. He was mounted on a giant four-legged green saurian with 3 heads. It was small compared to the extinct Earth giants, she realized, but it was lithe and fast. Recovering quickly from the shock of the bizarre and unexpected sight, Kathryn calculated her course and pace in relation to the soar that was racing through the woods. The reins on the bridle, fitted to the center head, were flapping freely on the crest of the long neck. Even if the boy got his panic under control, he still wouldn't be able to stop the animal. Ahead, Kathryn could see the large meadow that separated the forested land from the Academy complex. If Shawnee could give her a burst of speed, she would break into the grassy expanse ahead of the charging lizard. "Hang on, Castile!" a male voice bellowed. Kathryn glanced back as her horse responded to her legs and thundered forward. The Starfleet officer was gaining on the runaway, but not fast enough. If the lizard wasn't stopped, it might charge straight into the congested Academy courtyards. A lot of people could be hurt. The space between Kathryn and the runaway closed steadily. Then suddenly, all 3 heads jerked up and the creature shied to one side. Unprepared for the abrupt move, the rider fell off. Seeing the Starfleet officer jump from his horse and run to help the boy, Kathryn focused totally on the lizard. As Kathryn had figured, Shawnee ran into the meadow slightly ahead of the soar. Not knowing how the horse would react if he got too close to an alien dinosaur with too many heads and an unfamiliar scent, Kathryn kept her distance and turned in a wide circle around the grassy field. Tired and riderless, the lizard didn't seem too anxious to get close to her and Shawnee either. Rather than trying to charge past her, it followed a similar but tighter course in ever-diminishing circles. Leading his winded horse, the Starfleet officer walked out of the woods with the boy just as the creature came to a stop. Kathryn reined Shawnee to face it. The soar stared back with 6 unblinking yellow eyes. The horse snorted, and she squeezed her legs to keep him from backing away. The man handed his reins to the boy and slowly approached. Kathryn had to keep the soar from running again until he reached it. When the lizard jumped to one side, Kathryn used the dressage techniques she had never fully appreciated to counter the move. The Starfleet officer's eyes widened as Shawnee sidestepped to block the lizard's path. Moving slowly around to the front of the creature, he spoke softly and extended his hand. As though sensing the futility of its situation, the animal lowered its center head and the man grabbed the loose reins. He jumped back as the left head tried to nip his shoulder. The right head continued to stare at Kathryn. With the runaway caught, Kathryn exhaled long and hard and patted Shawnee soundly on the neck. "That was the slickest piece of horsemanship I've seen in quite a while, young lady. Very clever maneuver, that circling." "Thank you, sir." As hard as Kathryn strove to excel, she was never comfortable responding to compliments. "It works with runaway horses." "And you weren't sure how your horse would feel about getting too close to a three-headed dinosaur, either." "That was a concern, sir, yes." "Captain Holbrook, and your cadet?" The man rubbed the underside of the trembling lizard's long, pointed central snout, which seemed to calm it. The left head took over the watch, while the right head snatched a large grasshopper from the grass. "Janeway, Captain. Cadet Kathryn Janeway." "I'd shake your hand, but I don't want to upset your horse or this Seagal serpent again." "That's quite all right, sir. I've got to get back to the academy for class, and Shawnee needs to be cooled out. With your permission, sir." "By all means." Nodding, Captain Holbrook dismissed her with a smile. Inclining her head respectfully, Kathryn turned Shawnee back towards the woods. She resisted the urge to check the time until she was out of sight. It was later than she realized, but she couldn't race back to the stables. The horse was overheated and had to be cooled down before she put him away. If she didn't take the time to walk him back to the barn, she'd have to walk him when she got there. And she still had to shower and change. It was also reasonably safe to assume that this would be one of those days her hair absolutely refused to behave. Kathryn was dreading the debriefing that would no doubt focus on her team's inadequate and deadly performance in the alien biota simulation. And now she was going to be late. Chapter 2. "So good of you to join us, Cadet Janeway," Commander Roberts said coldly. Closing the classroom door, Kathryn marched to her seat under the instructor's hard gaze. She hoped the flush of embarrassment burning her cheeks wasn't as red as it felt. Sliding into her chair, she realized that her three teammates were too preoccupied with their own problems to care about hers. At least Commander Roberts was debriefing the teams as individual groups. Having their poor performance rated in front of the whole class would be too much to bear. "As I was saying," Commander Roberts went on, "all of you had opportunities to avert the biological contamination before, during, and after the containment field failed." He graced each of the cadets with a pointed stare. "One or two of those options might have saved your lives, too." "What options, sir?" Stunned, Kathryn blurted out the question without raising her hand to be recognized. Commander Roberts chose to overlook it, but not because he was letting her off the hook. "Why don't you tell me?" Kathryn's mind reeled, but she couldn't just sit there like a total dunce and not respond to a direct question. "A secondary containment field, isolating the whole lab. Then the organism wouldn't have contaminated the rest of the ship before the radiation sweep killed it." The instructor nodded. "Quite true. But you and your associates would still be dead." "Not if we had been wearing E-suits." Kathryn paled, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. "Environmental suits would have saved us." "But the organism was corrosive." Chav rose out of his seat, his snout wrinkling with indignation. "I have already determined that it would degrade metals and plastics as well as organic substances on contact. It would have eaten through the E-suits just like it did the SEALs." Kathryn breathed easier when Commander Roberts turned his probing attention to the Tellarite. "And just when did you arrive at that conclusion, Cadet?" 38 minutes after I began my analysis." Grunting curtly, Chav sat back down. Mario's dark eyes narrowed. "But E-suits would have protected us from the radiation sweep. The organism would have been neutralized before it compromised our suits. Yeah, Tava's antennae bobbed as she emphatically nodded her head. And maybe Kathryn wouldn't have hesitated to initiate the sequence if she knew she wouldn't die. Kathryn's head snapped around to stare at the Andorian. She wasn't angry. Tava had made a valid point, and Kathryn couldn't avoid the implication. Had she hesitated for that one critical second that would have destroyed the organism before it escaped the lab and killed the crew?
Don't blame Janeway, Tava.
Chav's small beady eyes blazed.
We wouldn't have needed a radiation sweep if you had noticed the energy fluctuation and modified the power flow before it shut down the field.
But Tava sputtered, then sagged. Commander Roberts interrupted sharply.
I think you've all gotten the point.
We have? Mario scowled, bewildered. Clasping his hands behind his back, the instructor began to pace. If you had been wearing E-suits, if the interruption in power had been noted, if, ladies and gentlemen, is the operative word. You have to consider all the ifs in any situation because the chance factor is always present. Always. Like Murphy's Law? Kathryn asked. It was an ancient Irish saying her father liked to quote, claiming that Murphy was an optimist. If anything can go wrong, it will. Commander Roberts smiled, and the tension in the room eased. In a way. The chance factor is a defining phrase for the fact that nothing is absolutely certain or predictable, including seals and containment fields, and most especially alien organisms we know nothing about. Kathryn nodded. So we should have considered everything that could go wrong and then taken precautions against them, no matter how remote the possibilities. Yes, Commander Roberts said, but even then it's impossible to take everything into account. Starfleet's business is the unknown, and sometimes the unknown is deadly. But there are certain pitfalls we can always avoid. Like what, sir? Mario asked. The Titanic is an ideal example. She was a great seagoing cruise ship that sank in the Atlantic Ocean on Earth in 1912 after hitting an iceberg. 1,523 of her crew and passengers went down with her. Only 705 survived, even though it was a calm night with a flat sea. That's awful! Tava shook her head in disbelief.
How could that happen?
Chav's gruff manner softened. The instructor took a deep breath. The Titanic was built with double hulls, and the men who built her had the arrogance to believe that she couldn't possibly sink. And they convinced everyone else that nothing could take the ship down. Because of that assumption, the Titanic wasn't equipped with enough lifeboats for everyone. Kathryn shifted uncomfortably, finding it hard to accept the senselessness of the Titanic's fate. It was a tragedy that could so easily have been avoided. Arrogance and assumption are the prelude of disaster, Commander Roberts said in closing. Dismissed. Kathryn rose and headed for the door in a daze. Arrogance and assumption. How often was she so certain she knew the best solution or had the right answer? Scientific mistake could be just as fatal as a warp core breach or a wrong command decision. Cadet Janeway. Huh? Kathryn blinked at Commander Roberts. Sir? Commander Brandon would like to see you in her office at 1400 hours. Kathryn's breath caught in her throat. She had not requested a meeting with her advisor. Why, sir? I'm sure she'll be happy to tell you. Commander Roberts glanced at his watch. In about 10 minutes. As Kathryn hurried toward the administration building, she was sure that Commander Brandon was going to tell her what she had suddenly figured out for herself, that she wasn't fit to be a Starfleet officer. At ease, Kathryn, Commander Brandon smiled kindly. Yes, sir. Ma'am. Commander will do nicely. Have a seat. Kathryn sat, perched stiffly on the edge of the chair, as the gray-haired woman quickly scanned her pad. "You're quite an accomplished young woman, Cadet Janeway. Tennis, diving, horseback riding, an impressive academic and athletic record at the Academy Institute. Vice Admiral Janeway must be very proud of you." Kathryn acknowledged the comment with a nod. Her father was so busy dealing with the Cardassian problem, she rarely saw him. Even so, she was convinced that she disappointed Edward Janeway more often than she made him proud, but there was no need to draw the counselor's attention to that. "How do you feel about your team's performance in the bioemergency simulation yesterday?" The question, which had nothing to do with what they had been discussing, was asked so casually that Kathryn answered without thinking, "Not very good, Commander." "And why is that?" Commander Brannon folded her hands on her desk and leaned forward expectantly. "Blindsided." Disarmed by the reference to her father, Kathryn had walked right into her advisor's verbal trap. There was no way out but to answer honestly. "I was responsible for the death of an entire crew because I didn't act fast enough." "Were you the only one who made a fatal error?" "No, sir." Kathryn stiffened. "Cadet Tava didn't notice a power interruption that triggered the emergency. Chav was analyzing the organism and should have initiated the radiation sequence, but he didn't. So I did. And Mario Santori could have programmed a containment field for the lab, but he didn't do that either. And none of us thought to wear e-suits as a precaution against the unexpected." "What aspect of the exercise disturbs you the most?" Kathryn almost shrugged, but caught herself. "Knowing that my life may depend on someone who doesn't know what they're doing, or that I might make a fatal mistake. It's a toss-up." Commander Brannon's expression remained composed as she made a note, then sat back. "Are you familiar with the Kobayashi Maru exercise for command track cadets?" "I've heard of it. The scenario is almost impossible to beat. Someone did once, a long time ago." Kathryn saw the advisor smile slightly as though she knew more about the infamous test than she was willing or allowed to say. The Kobayashi Maru was like a secret ritual that people only mentioned in whispers. The woman cleared her throat. "Yes, well, James T. Kirk aside, the scenario was designed to test emotional reactions to failure. Yesterday's biosim does the same thing. If a team solves one potentially lethal problem, it's presented with another, and then another. You had no hope of saving the Lancaster crew." Kathryn frowned. "But Commander Roberts just told us we had options that could have averted the disaster." "You did, to a degree. Wearing e-suits would have prolonged the inevitable, as would any one of several other measures you might have taken. The bioemergency simulation is the ultimate demonstration of the chance factor, but that isn't its only purpose." "I see." Kathryn's mouth tightened. She felt betrayed by a simulation that was programmed to ensure failure. How could anyone pass a failure test? "I'll be blunt, Kathryn. Academy cadets are expected to strive for and achieve a level of excellence, but no one is perfect. No one. You've set unrealistic and therefore self-defeating expectations for yourself, and you have difficulty accepting anything less than perfection in others. Do you think that's a fair assessment?" Kathryn nodded and lowered her gaze. She couldn't speak because of the lump in her throat. "You have the potential to be a fine science officer," the commander continued gently. "The essence of exploration is a discovery of the unknown, and consequently, the handling of unpredictable situations. Starfleet officers have to be flexible in order to function effectively, and they must be prepared to cope with the unexpected. You've certainly proven yourself capable in that regard." Kathryn raised her eyes and met Commander Brannon's concerned gaze. But equally important, a good officer has to accept and overcome his or her own imperfections and deal with the limitations of others. The woman hesitated, sighing. And you do seem to have a problem with that. Swallowing hard, Kathryn struggled to maintain an expression of calm reserve. The commander's observation was correct, and she had no defense. She would just have to work harder to control her feelings and adjust her attitude. The sooner unsuitable cadets are weeded out of the academy, the counselor said gravely, the better for everyone, including those young people who must find a different direction for their lives. In your case, I'm convinced there's only one thing to do at this point. Numb with disbelief, Kathryn braced herself. She was going to be kicked out of the academy in Starfleet before she even got started.